Okay, gang. So continuing on, let's look at the next line of evidence for evolution. Let's look at comparative anatomy. And so comparative anatomy is exactly what it sounds like. You compare the anatomy between different groups of living things. In this case, we have some different vertebrates that are put up here. Most of these are mammals. One of them is actually not a mammal. It's an ave, which is the bird. And in this case, it's the arms that we've put up here, the bone structure, the anatomy of the bones of the arms. And it's color-coded based on the similar bones. So in humans, we have a humerus, we have our radius and ulna, we have our carpals, metacarpals, and then the phalanges. And in a horse, you also have a humerus. The radius and ulna for them is actually fused together. They have the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. Same thing for a cat, for a bat. It looks a lot different for the bird, but there they are. And then for a whale as well. um, what this suggests is not that we evolved from each other, but that we all share a common ancestor who had very similar bones that all of these guys have. It probably had a humerus, some type of radius and ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges, and it was success. That the DNA that made those features, that built those features were successful. So that allowed them to live better and to pass more likely to pass that particular trait onto their offspring. And thus, it was maintained because it's a good structure. It helps us survive in the world in which we live. But everyone lives in slightly different places, so selective pressures in different areas, through natural selection, weeded out some variations and promoted other variations. And so over millions of years, in some cases hundreds of millions of years, we see the evolution of these features slightly, a little bit over time, just a little here and a little there, a little here and a little there, into the vast array and diversity of structures that we see here on the page. But in their fundamental groups, they're all still radiuses. They're all still humeruses, radius and ulnas, and carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges, just slightly modified. This comparative anatomy suggests highly that we all share a common ancestor that had these features. And there are other lines of evidence that also suggest common ancestry. But by comparing anatomical structures, you can actually see who is more closely related to whom, based on the presence or absence and the shapes and functions of similar anatomical features. And so our last big line of evidence is DNA comparison. I know this is kind of a cartoony picture, but it gets the point across. So again, DNA is a blueprint for building living things. If two blueprints are very similar, then the things that will be made from those blueprints will be very similar. Since DNA is passed on from generation to generation, with slight modifications in between, the more closely the DNA is of two different organisms, that suggests that they are more closely related. We've tested this. We've put it through, and we see that DNA comparisons match up with things that are similar in anatomical structure and in function. So, for example, here's the different organisms. Here's the comparison with the percent they may match up with humans. 99.5% of your DNA is pretty much the same as a chimpanzee's. And so forth and so on with all the different primates to different degrees. I mean, if 99.5% is the same as a completely different species, imagine how much DNA you share with other members of the human species, not just your family members. I mean, imagine how similar you are to your family members, and so forth and so on. It's just crazy to think about. But 99.5% of your DNA is the same as chimpanzees, which suggests that we share a recent common ancestor. 88% of your DNA is the same as a mouse, right? It's a mammal, so it's pretty close. 75% of your DNA is the same as a chicken. Wow, right? And that's why not Neanderthals. That's why cannibals say that, people taste of chicken. People taste like chicken, so babies taste like chicken. So babies, chicken nuggets. Just throwing that out there. In survival situations, don't think just eat, right? Just kidding. Don't eat babies. But 60% of your DNA is the same as a fruit fly. And that may seem like a big stretch because we are very different looking and acting than fruit flies, but they're still living things. They still have a head, legs. They still have a respiratory system, a circulatory system. Um, they still have a nervous system. I mean, and waste removal systems. I mean, they still have all that. So at a fundamental level, a lot of the DNA that we have is the same as pretty much all life. But it's just modified slowly over time to create us and helps us live in a way in the world that we live is good for survival. So that's all really cool. So what's another way we can use our DNA to say how closely related we are to the other things? Well, let's take the primates. Let's look at the some of the genes that are inside of all primates. So there's a gene called the ERV gene, and there's different versions of this gene. And by comparing what animals currently have, what versions of the gene, we can start putting together, this is called a phylogenetic tree, and it represents kind of like evolutionary relationships. It doesn't show it shows passing of time, not literal timeline, but does show passing of time. So let's say all primates have the ERV1 gene. It's found in all primates. But only monkeys have the ERV2 gene. No one else has that. The gibbons, great apes, humans, they don't have the ERV2. So that suggests the ERV2 gene evolved in monkeys after they diverged from the rest of the primates. And so the ERV3 gene is found in the gibbons, great apes, and humans, but it's not found in monkeys. So another good line of evidence that the ERV3 gene arose in the ancestors of these guys after they diverged from the ancestors of modern-day monkeys. And so forth and so on. Like with the ERV4, great apes have that, so the great apes and the humans. And the ERV5 is only found in humans, but we possess the ERV5, the ERV4, the ERV3, and the ERV1. We do not possess the ERV2. That was in the ancestors of monkeys. Humans are a type of great ape. And so when we do our DNA comparisons, now 20 years ago, this would have been very impossible to do, but the Human Genome Project has really taken us far, and especially with our technology for running DNA comparisons between different organisms and being able to study the genome of a species. We can now go through and look at the entire genetic code for all organisms and start comparing them. And it's really helped us out. It's allowed us to be able to go through and figure out some problems we had before with our phylogenetic ordering. And in some cases, like with willow trees, they're completely redoing the organization because trees are difficult. Plants can interbreed a lot, and it causes some problems with the DNA as far as putting things together and whatnot. But the DNA comparisons helped us out a lot. So, for example, these aligned sequences, and then here's the gaps, the gray sections, the blue-gray, the line sequences. You can tell that the more it aligns up, the more DNA we have in common. A lot with chimpanzees, right? And not so much with the gorillas, and even less with orangutans. Still pretty close with all of them, more so than trees, right? But we are all pretty closely related, and DNA is a great line that tells us our evolutionary history and whom we are more closely related to. I think it's just a little fun one to put up there. Keep in mind, evolution is not about making you better than anything else. Evolution is about making you survive in an environment, or allowing, not necessarily you, but allowing your species to survive in a changing world. Evolution doesn't give you what you want, right? It gives you what you need to survive. So in no time or place is a beaver ever just going to evolve a chainsaw as a hand. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't give you what you want. It gives you random variations, and maybe some of those will work in some way at some place and time and allow your species to be able to keep on surviving. It will change, but again, the whole point is to keep life alive, to keep life going. What's this up here? Well, this is basically, remember there are two big ways that life can change. That DNA will change. And the first one is mutations, just random changes that occur to the genetic code in between generations. And also with sexual reproduction, You have crossing over, which is where some of your chromosomes reach out. They do what called the AT&T. If you're old enough to know that commercial, AT&T, reach out and touch someone. They reach out and touch each other, and they swap some of their DNA, which leads to a huge variation in all of the gametes, and therefore a huge variation between all of the offspring, which allows our species to be able to cope with different environmental conditions and how they change back and forth. So I'll leave you off of this for lines of evidence for evolution. You're all a bunch of Homo sapiens, right? Simpsons is a great show, and I thought this was a really cute cartoon. So those are it. Those are our 4 big lines of evolution that we're looking at in this class. There are multiple other lines of evidence, and I encourage you to go and explore and read and do some research and see what the other lines of evidence are, because there's a bunch that's out there. It's everywhere. You just got to know what to look for. And I will see you later. Have a good one. Bye.